Jobs were priority one in President Obama's State of the Union address last night, and as you can see right there. Also, the president making a point to give Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner a hug. Well, you could call it a hug, as Obama walked into the chamber to deliver his first State of the Union speech last night. Perhaps a signal to the public that he stands by his man, stands by Geithner after he got, as you would say, basically a grilling from Congress. Okay, well, joining me from Davos to talk about Geithner's future and all the bank regulation buzz is Stuart Eizenstat. He's partner at Covington Burling. He is also a former deputy secretary at the U.S. Treasury Department, and also the former undersecretary at the U.S. State Department. And Stuart, good to have you with us.
Thank you.
And as I understand that you were able to read some of this testimony, as I assume you probably didn't have a chance to actually watch it live. But what did you think? How do you think Geithner handled himself?
Well, first, I've known Tim for many years. When I was Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, Tim was Undersecretary for International Affairs, and I saw him deal with some very difficult issues like the Asian financial crisis. I thought he handled himself very well. He has enormous integrity. He's a great public servant, and he's doing a great job. You know, I think it's very important not to take cheap political shots and have 20/20 hindsight. At the time that Tim was the president of the New York Fed, we were in a major fiscal crisis. It was a war zone. He had to make very difficult and quick decisions. Everyone now in 20/20 hindsight says, well, you know, why didn't you see the Lehman problem?
Right.
Well, if AIG had been allowed to go under in the meltdown, it would have made Lehman look like a tea party. So Tim had a question: let them default or not default? That was a real issue. And if there had been a default, we could have had a potential meltdown of the entire financial system.
Right, but I don't, you know, I'm not always sure that that is the reason why people are so upset. I think people are so upset because it doesn't seem as if Tim Geithner is being forthcoming, and he's sort of talking outside of two sides of his mouth. You know, I was just talking to Hugh, our reporter who's been breaking a lot of this news, saying, for instance, that, you know, Tim Geithner saying that I take full responsibility for what happened at the New York Fed before November 24th, and at the same time saying, look, I wasn't involved in any of those decisions, so therefore don't come to me with answers.
Well, I don't think that's what he said. What he said was when it came to not disclosing certain data, he wasn't involved. Tim believes in
that was all decided during the
and
time while he was still at the New York Fed, though, and before he was announced as Treasury Secretary. So then the question is, why was he not involved?
I understand that. Well, I think that if Tim said that he was not involved, then he wasn't involved. He's a man of enormous integrity. The big issue and why people are really upset is they don't like the bailout. And it's understandable that they don't like the bailouts of AIG or of the other major banks. But that was unfortunately something that was necessary because there was a systemic risk to the system, and that's the real issue. It's not the disclosure issue. If people had had the disclosure in any event, they wouldn't know any more than they know today, which is that there was a major loan, that the big banks were given 100 cents on the dollar, and had they not been given that, they themselves would have been at great risk. So the issue of whether or not it was or it wasn't disclosed is not the key issue. The key issue is that they made the right decision under battlefield conditions, and that was to try to save the banking system, and
right.
If they had not done so, the whole banking system could have collapsed.
Stu, okay, let me just leave you with this, because as you mentioned right from the start, you know Tim Geithner very well. You support him. You know, through those call logs that were released by ISA on November 28th, you talked with Geithner. In fact, this was shortly after it was announced he'd be Treasury Secretary. Now, I'm just asking you to jog your memory a little bit. I'm not trying to be nosy to see what you were talking about. But do you remember what you said? You know, what you talked about with him? Do you remember what his mood was like at that time?
Yes, he was being nominated. He had been nominated 4 days before. We were talking about his confirmation. I was congratulating him on the nomination. I had worked with him for two very difficult but very exciting years in the last 2 years of the Clinton administration in Treasury. So it was really a social call to exchange congratulations and to wish him well, and to say I would be willing to help in any way I could.
Okay. All right, Stuart, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks so much. I was Stu Eizenstat from Davos.